A velvet rope blocked my driveway. A valet stand now stood where my old cattle trough used to be, and on my own porch a woman in red heels was auctioning off my ranch like it was some vintage Cabernet. She was the president of the HOA, and she'd even called the cops on me if I hadn't come back a day early. Everything my father worked his whole life for might have been gone. Drop a comment below with where you're watching from and tell me, honestly, what would you do if you came home to find your land being sold off without your say-so? I'd only planned to be away for 5 days. A quick consulting job in Colorado. I left Ricky, my ranch hand, in charge. When I left, everything was in order: cattle fed, fences mended, gates secure. But as soon as I turned off County Road 16 and saw a row of Audis and Teslas lined up like some wine and cheese fundraiser, my gut twisted. I thought maybe someone got lost, or worsey something had happened to Ricky. Then I saw the signs: Legacy Ranch Redevelopment Preview, brought to you by Evergreen HOA. And there she was in the middle of it all, Mick in hand, Celeste Whitmore, queen of the HOA, dressed in her usual sharp blazer, flashing a smile that could slice glass. She caught sight of me pulling in and didn't even flinch. Instead, she said, "Up next to Lot 7, original timber beams, bond access, starting at $600,000. Lot 7. That was my backyard. I braked hard, jumped out, and made it maybe 20 feet before some kid in a clip-on tie blocked my path. "Sorry, sir, this is a private function," he said. I let out a short laugh, more to keep from shoving him into the fountain than anything. "I live here," I said. "You're standing on my land." Before he could answer, Celeste raised her voice. "Security, please remove this man from the property. He is not authorized to be here." "Authorized?" I echoed, locking eyes with her. "I own this place, Celeste." She strode toward me with her clipboard like I was a confused delivery guy. "Clay," she said, voice syrupy sweet. "You've been gone more than 30 days. According to HOA Bylaw 642, your property was reclassified as dormant. We're proceeding with redevelopment." My jaw clenched. "I was gone 5. She arched a brow. "We measure absence by activity, not the calendar." That's when the sirens arrived at 3 sheriff's units. Celeste pointed dramatically. "That man is disrupting a sanctioned community event and making attendees feel unsafe." The deputies stepped out slowly, eyes shifting between me and the tented auction setup. One of them, a deputy Rolanda, recognized me. "Mr. Randall?" he asked. I nodded and handed him the laminated copy of the deed I always kept in my glove box. After a quick look, he nodded back. "Looks solid." Then he turned to Celeste. "Ma'am, unless you have something that contradicts this deed, we're going to need you to step down." The mood shifted. Guests murmured. Celeste's jaw tensed. "This is a civil issue," she snapped. "We'll let the lawyers settle it." She turned and stalked away, but not before leaning in and hissing, "This isn't over." I watched her heels pierce my lawn like bayonets as she left. The event unraveled in slow motion, a champagne flutes half drunk, folding chairs askew. Someone even tried to take a brochure that had my name on it. I let them. I had one go. "I'll make it to my porch." My porch. I unlocked the front door. The lock hadn't felt another key in over 40 years. I went straight for the old war chest my father left behind. Beneath the medals and old photos was a thick leather folder. Inside, the original 5-page deed, complete with a clause added in 1982. Owner reserves unilateral veto over all third-party claims to land use in the event of contested jurisdiction. One word jumped out at me: veto. That word was about to become Celeste's worst nightmare. Just then, my phone buzzed. A message from Ricky. "Boss, you might want to see what she just sent to the home mailing list. She's calling you a squatter." I stared down at the folder, my fingers tightening around it. This wasn't just about land anymore. This was war. The next morning, everything felt different. The sky was still clear, the sun golden over the fields, but the image of strangers sipping Chardonnay where cattle once grazed stuck in my head like a bad dream. I walked the fence line, coffee in hand, boots crunching on gravel. Brochures from yesterday's guests littered the ground. One flyer had a digital rendering of my barn, a roof torn off, replaced with solar panels, labeled as a wellness center. I crushed it in my fist. Whoever dreamed that Up had never wrangled a frostbitten calf in a snowstorm or dug out a rusted axle in the pouring rain. They didn't understand land, but she understood loopholes, and that made her dangerous. I drove into town. First stop, the county recorder's office. I needed to see exactly what kind of paper trail Celeste had forged. The clerk on duty was Kent, mid-30s, sharp guy. I'd once helped him out when a system glitch messed up his hunting license. He recognized me instantly. "Clay, what brings you in? Don't tell me you're finally selling that back pasture to the solar folks." I grinned. "Only if they buy the hoe with it." Then I got serious. "I need all recent filings tied to Parcel 48, Section 7A, especially anything tied to Evergreen Hoe." Kent raised an eyebrow and tapped at his keyboard. "Well, damn," he muttered. Turns out Celeste had submitted a redevelopment claim less than 3 days after I left for Colorado. She folded my land into a larger zoning update. I claimed it fell under provisional governance expansion after a vote passed at an home meeting I'd never been notified about. Worse, she'd filed something called an intent to establish redevelopment rights, not legally binding on its own, but enough to trigger bureaucratic red tape that could freeze my ability to make repairs or changes to the property. Kent kept scrolling. "She didn't get a single signature from you?" he asked. "Not one," I said. And that's when it really hit me. This ran deeper than I thought. Kent leaned in close, voice dropping to a whisper. "Man, you've really ticked off the wrong petty tyrant." With copies of the filings in hand, I headed across town to the old office of Henry Tam, my father's former attorney. Henry was pushing 80 and still sharp enough to carve a legal argument into granite with a butter knife. His office was a white colonial that doubled as his firm, just 2 rooms, a ceiling fan older than the moon landing, and enough paper stacked around to wallpaper the state of Texas. When I walked in, he didn't even glance up from his legal pad. "You're in trouble, Clay?" he asked, like he'd already penciled me in. "How bad?" I asked, taking a seat across from his worn desk. "Bad enough that if you blink too hard, Celeste might slap a zoning order on your eyelashes," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "But not hopeless. What she's doing is legal intimidation, bureaucratic mud wrestling. We'll have to get dirty, but we won't drown." Henry broke it down. Hoe rules varied across states, but here in Texas, they only had authority over properties that had either opted into Hoe governance or fell under post-division expansion clauses. My ranch had never been part of any subdivision and never even close. But Celeste had found a clever workaround. She'd latched onto a 30-year-old map update that vaguely referenced residential development near County Road 16, the same one running past the north edge of my fence. "So, they're claiming proximity gives them jurisdiction?" I asked. Henry nodded, grim. "It's a stretch, but enough of one to bog you down in red tape. Push too hard, and they'll start tossing around words like a tax review, a code enforcement, and even whisper a eminent domain. Celeste isn't just playing the long game, she's laying traps." I leaned back, the pressure sinking into my chest. Part of me wanted to expose everything with a camera crew, tear her scheme apart in public, and let the whole town watch her burn. But that would be reactionary, and I needed something better. Leverage, real leverage, something that would make her regret ever using my name on one of her brochures. That night, I sat at my father's old desk, a half-empty bottle of rye beside a stack of land records. I pored over survey maps, irrigation claims, grazing rights, anything that might expose a weak spot in her foundation. Just before midnight, I found it. A topographic map dated 1982, signed by a county surveyor, outlined an irrigation canal that sliced diagonally through the southern field. It technically split the land into 2 plots, one primary, one auxiliary. That second plot was smaller, maybe half an acre, but it had never been formally merged back into the main parcel, which meant, legally, it was still undeclared. And undeclared land doesn't fall under residential governance unless it's been specifically petitioned for inclusion. Celeste had missed that. "You missed a corner, Celeste," I said aloud. "And corners are where empires fall." I made copies, slipped them into a folder labeled Playbook, and knew I'd wake up with a new strategy. Before I even left the study, my phone buzzed. A new home newsletter had just gone out, Reclaiming the Future, Evergreen's bold new chapter. There it was, a grainy photo of my barn from the auction. Below it, a paragraph claiming the site was already in early stage conversion. Legal formalities pending. it said, but the community's vision was moving forward thanks to proactive leadership. I stared at that word appending. She was walking a legal tightrope, counting on me to slip up before she did. Fine, let her walk. The next morning, I visited one of the most underappreciated offices in the country, the Agricultural Zoning Board. I requested all irrigation permits issued between 1975 and 1990. After 3 hours and a coughing fit from the man buried in the records room, I walked out with a sealed file. That little canal in the auxiliary field, it wasn't just a ditch, it was a registered water conduit, with easement rights granted to my grandfather, which meant that unmerged plot had its own legal status. And the hoe? They hadn't even noticed it existed. Back at the ranch, I climbed the old wooden watchtower my dad had built during his survivalist phase. I looked out over the land and I didn't see fences or fields anymore. I saw a chessboard. Celeste thought she was playing Monopoly, buying land, stacking properties, flipping them for profit. But I was playing chess, and I'd just moved a knight where she couldn't see it. She didn't know it yet, but I wasn't just defending my land, I was setting the board for her downfall. 3 days later, I pulled on the most hideous sports coat I owned, slicked back my hair with a dab of motor oil masquerading as pomade, and walked into Celeste's neck strap like I was arriving for a wedding. They were calling it an investor preview and private bid mixer, hosted in a tent big enough to house a helicopter planted squarely on my northern pasture. Inside was a crowd that thought ranch meant salad dressing and ordered French water by brand. They sipped wine from glassware worth more than my pickup, and at the center of it all, standing beneath a faux chandelier made from reclaimed barn wood, was Celeste, cream-colored pantsuit, heels sinking into turf, face full of surgical confidence. I adjusted my name tag. Mark Walters, a strategic land acquisition consultant. Mark had a backstory, private equity portfolio packed with land to luxury conversions, no online trail. Of course he preferred discreet, off-grid investments. I made sure to speak just loud enough near her. People, I hear these ranch parcels are nearly ready for flipping, I said casually to a man who smelled like imported citrus and wore loafers with no socks. Be a shame if regulatory eyes started poking around before the deal's close. He nodded thoughtfully and no idea what I meant. Celeste spotted me before I reached the fruit table. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw twitched, but she didn't react. She assumed I was just another shark in the tank, a new player with deep pockets and flexible ethics. Her first mistake. The auction wasn't traditional. No gavels, just quiet interest cards, where guests could write their bids. One of her young agents handed me a laminated lot guide. Lot 7, my chicken coop. Lot 9, my fishing pond. Lot 3, marketed as a scenic overlook with development potential. It was actually a limestone ridge with 3 active rattlesnake dens and a view of dead mesquite. Still, I watched someone scribble down a bid north of 600 grand. That's when I knew this wasn't just ambition anymore. This was delusion, with money behind it. I waited until Lot 5. Lot 5 came up and it was the acre just behind my house. The one with the old smokehouse and the ancient oak tree where my father buried his dog. It had what realtors call heritage appeal. Bidding interest popped up from 3 parties. One guy looked like he hosted crypto seminars at golf clubs. I raised my hand. 1.2 million. Cash. The entire tent went quiet. Even Celeste blinked. Someone near the fruit display actually gasped. I leaned in slightly. Contingent on immediate possession and full HOA override authority. It was a bluff, a massive one, but Celeste couldn't afford to call it a knot with investors watching. She lit up like I just offered her a diamond ring. Ladies and gentlemen, she purred into her mic, one manicured claw gripping it like a trophy. We are thrilled to welcome Mr. Walters to our investment family. His commitment is a shining example of Evergreen's bold future. Cameras flashed. I smiled, jaw aching from the pressure I'd been holding in. As the applause faded, I made my way to the investor services booth and handed over my bid card, signed with the most fake signature I could muster. I'll need to personally review the property deed, I said smoothly. Just want to make sure there are no surprises. The woman nodded, handed me a glossy folder of brochures, and whispered, Miss Whitmore will be with you shortly. And she was. 5 minutes later, behind the tent, arms folded and lips curled into a sneer that could have melted vinyl. "You're insane," she hissed. "And profoundly stupid." I let a bit of the accent drop. "Funny, that's usually what people say right before they lose." She stepped in close. "You don't have the money. You're bluffing. And when this grumbles, I'll sue you for fraud so hard your cattle will need legal counsel." I smiled and raised a tiny voice recorder. "Could you repeat that for me?" She fell silent, then smiled like a wolf. "You think you're clever, Clay, but you're not the only one with recordings. Remember, this land sits in a regulatory gray zone. One well-placed noise complaint, and your whole ranch could be flagged as unsuitable for livestock. And don't forget fire safety. One spark, and that barn becomes evidence." Then she turned on her heel, leaving little divots in the grass with every step, like she was stabbing punctuation into the dirt. I stood there, heart racing, and not from fear, but from adrenaline. She'd shown her hand. She was nervous. That meant it was time to reveal mine. That night, I uploaded the recording and sent it straight to Henry. "She's threatening arson, zoning violations, and legal retaliation," I said. Henry whistled low on the other end. "She's getting sloppy." "Good. Keep her talking. In the meantime, I'll draft a cease and desist with the audio attached. Let's see how she handles some heat." But Celeste wasn't through yet. The next morning, I found a fresh notice taped to my fence. "Pending investigation, a potential land misrepresentation." The bold evergreen HOA logo stamped right at the top. Below it, a threat: "All transactions involving Parcel 48 are frozen pending administrative review." That's when it clicked. She'd turned my fake bid into a legal snare. By pretending to sell the land, she'd justified a development freeze, a one that included my own property. I paced my porch like a caged animal, reading the notice again and again. It was smart, sinister, a checkmate in technical terms unless I found a move she hadn't seen. Then it hit me. Lot 5. According to her own marketing materials, the buyer of Lot 5 had the right to request a site inspection escorted by HOA compliance officials. That was my doorway. Not as the landowner. As the buyer, I could walk my own property under the HOA's watchful eye, inspect whatever I wanted, and dig into the cracks in her foundation. Hell, I could plant a few of my own. The next afternoon, I scheduled the inspection. Celeste didn't show. She sent Nolana, her assistant. Nervous type, looked like he cried during Pixar movies. He followed me like a shadow while I wandered the grounds. I took notes on the smokehouse, snapped photos of the soil, asked careful questions about drainage and permit filings. At one point, Nolan casually admitted most of the updated development maps hadn't been reviewed by the county yet. I nearly hugged him. I wrapped up the inspection right at the southern edge of the property where the unclaimed auxiliary strip sat like a sleeping giant. I snapped a few pictures of the old irrigation channel, then looked over my shoulder at Nolan. "Tell me," I asked innocently, "is this plot included in the current development filings?" He blinked. "Plot? That's not on any of our sheets." I grinned. "That's funny. It has a registered water easement, which means it predates Evergreen's authority entirely." I let that hang in the air. Nolan paled. By the time I stepped back onto my porch, the gears were turning. Celeste thought she'd flipped my bluff into a trap, but she'd failed to see I'd already redrawn the battlefield. This wasn't the endgame, it was the opening move. The next day, Henry and I sat at his desk, an ancient oak slab covered in legal documents and coffee rings. He wore his usual suspenders, reading glasses balanced on the tip of his nose, sipping from a chipped mug that read "World's Oldest Paralegal." I laid out the photos, especially the one showing the irrigation channel and the old metal stake marking the southern line. "This right here," I said, tapping it with the back of my pencil. "This is our missile silo." Henry smirked. "That auxiliary plot is unlisted, unzoned, and totally unclaimed, which means the HOA doesn't even know it exists." "You know what that makes it?" I asked. He nodded. "A legal landmine, and if we time it right, it'll blow their whole case to pieces." The plan was straightforward. We'd draft a demand letter citing the irrigation easement and the land's unclassified status. Then we'd file a motion with the zoning board to request an official reclassification. That motion would trigger a public hearing complete with paperwork, testimonies, county oversight, and most importantly a broken bar delays, the kind developers hate, the kind that terrify HOA boards. But to pull it off, we needed one more thing. a copy of the original HOA charter and its amendment history, and that document was locked in Celeste's office. So, I did what any rational man would do. I called Ricky. He'd been laying low since the day of the showdown, not because he was scared. Ricky wasn't scared of much beyond women and gluten, but Celeste's goons had made threats. Celeste's crew had warned Ricky to stay away, threatening to report him for unauthorized equipment use if he set foot back on the ranch. I found him at his cousin's trailer park, elbow deep in the guts of a busted ATV, sipping from a half-empty Dr. Pepper. Knew you'd show eventually, he smirked. Ladies got that hoe running like it's the damn mob. I brought him up to speed, then asked for a simple favor: attend the next HOA board meeting, posing as someone applying for seasonal groundskeeping work. Ricky scratched at his beard. You want me to infiltrate a pack of Chardonnay-sipping neighborhood queens? I nodded. Legally. He took a long drink, wiped his mouth, and grinned. Hell, Flay, why didn't you just say so? I'll even put on a tie. While Ricky suited up, I made a call to Nalana, the assistant from the inspection. I invited him out for coffee, keeping up the act of an eager investor. I played dumb, acted concerned about zoning issues, and asked if there were any other permits, maps, or amendments I should be aware of. Eager to impress and visibly nervous, Nolan spilled faster than sweet tea in a tipped glass. Miss Whitmore updated the charter last year, he confided, but we haven't filed it with the county yet. She said something about getting approval by practice, not policy. Practice? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, like, you know, de facto control or whatever. Kinda her phrase. I smiled and tucked that little gem away. De facto control wasn't governance, that was just organized squatting with a newsletter. 2 days later, Ricky showed up on my porch, grinning and waving a USB stick. Got it off Nolan's laptop, he announced proudly. Kid left it open while I was moving some potted plants. What that USB contained was gold off-the-record meeting minutes, questionable expense reports billed as consulting, and a draft email to a developer titled "Once the Old Guy Folds, We Pounce." Henry flipped through it all with quiet satisfaction, then set the folder down and said, "Time to strike." We sent the documents straight to the county clerk along with a formal audit request. At the same time, Henry filed the land reclassification motion, attaching maps, photos, and sworn statements from my father's old surveyor. Soon after, Celeste received a summons to appear before the county zoning board. It must have rattled her, because she came at me swinging. That weekend, I found my front gate padlocked from the outside. Stapled to the post was a county notice: environmental hazard assessment pending, do not enter. There were no hazards, no leaks, not even trash, just an anonymous complaint, conveniently backed by a blurry photo of an alleged fuel drum which turned out to be an empty rain barrel from 1973. Celeste had pulled strings, and not legal ones, but the kind tangled in bureaucratic red tape. She was trying to drown me in paperwork, and I'll admit, it almost worked. I snapped, broke the padlock with a crowbar and stormed up to the ridge to breathe. I stood there, scanning the land where I'd played as a boy, worked as a teen, and rebuilt as a man, and I realized that she'd taken something intangible but sacred, the piece of ownership. Then I heard it, a twig snapping behind me. I turned to see 2 HOA inspectors poking around near the irrigation canal, clipboards in hand. "You're trespassing," I said. They looked startled. One flashed a badge like it meant something. "We're conducting a perimeter compliance review," he replied. "Under whose authority?" He hesitated. "Executive committee." I stepped closer. "This is undeclared land, outside of HOA boundaries." His mouth opened, then closed again. "And you just admitted to unlawful entry," I added, raising my phone like I was recording. It wasn't on, but they didn't know that. They left fast. That night, Henry called with news. She brought in Brad Cullerton. I sat straight up. Brad was infamous, an HOA fixer with a polished smile and a talent for backroom deals that left people legally penniless and spiritually wrecked. "We need to act now," Henry urged, "before a judge who plays tennis with her cousin gets assigned." So, I pivoted. I crafted a one Celeste wouldn't resist. I emailed her personally, saying I was willing to settle if she dropped all claims and granted permanent HOA immunity for my ranch. I made it sound like I was folding, like I was scared. Within the hour, she replied with a smug, overstuffed contract. But here's where she slipped. Attached was a revised HOA zoning map. Her initials were all over it. The map claimed full governance over my land, including the auxiliary plot, but that parcel, it was incorrectly merged with the primary tract. She had lied, signed it, and tried to use it as legal leverage. I printed 3 copies, highlighted the false merge, and added them to the evidence folder, because when you fight dirty, the paper trail always bleeds first. And Celeste, she'd just handed me the knife. Then things got ugly. It started with a dead calf, and not what you'd expect. But out here, death comes either naturally or by design. I had a feeling this wasn't natural. The morning after we submitted that map to the zoning board, I found one of my heifers limp by the creek, her front leg tangled in fresh barbed wire that hadn't been there the day before. The cut was too clean, the wire too strategically placed. It wasn't random. It was a warning. I didn't have proof, but I trusted my gut in war zones and courtroom battle and I wasn't about to start second-guessing it now. That was only the beginning. Within 2 days, the ranch became a battlefield of silent sabotage. My mailbox was ripped clean off its post. The internet went out. My well pump failed 3 times, even though the electrician had tuned it up just last month. At first, I chalked it up to coincidence, but then I saw those same 2 clipboard-wielding HOA volunteers lurking at my pasture gate during sunset. That's when it clicked. Celeste couldn't win in court, not yet, so she was trying to wear me down, break me, force me into submission through exhaustion and harassment, and I'll be honest. For a while, it was working. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. Every nighttime sound had me jumping to the window with a flashlight in one hand and my sidearm in the other. I started locking the barn, then double-locking it. Ricky brought over his old shepherd, Hank, just to be safe. Hank wasn't a barker, but when he did growl, it meant someone was close. And on the 3rd night, Hank growled. I didn't see anything when I stepped outside that night, just tire tracks by the western fence and the faint, acrid scent of diesel hanging in the air. But it was enough. The next morning, I called the sheriff. He came out, took a look, and gave me the same old line. Without a license plate or camera footage, there wasn't much they could do. So I did what any man does when he's got no one left to lean on. I broke, quietly and alone. Around 2 in the morning, I found myself sitting in the same creaky chair where my father used to do his nightly readings, staring into the wood stove as the embers died into ash. I was exhausted, worn down from fighting, from always having to look over my shoulder on land that was supposed to be mine, tired of playing 5 steps ahead just to stay even. I poured myself 2 fingers of rye, but didn't drink, just held the glass, whispering to no one. Am I losing? That night, I stumbled on my father's old notebook, not his legal ledger, his personal journal, tucked between a pair of dusty tax binders. It was full of crooked handwriting, taped-in photos, and yellowed newspaper clippings on crop rotation, soil health, and even whole lawsuits dating back to the 80s. One line had been underlined so hard, the pen nearly tore through the page. They only win if you give up your peace before they take your land. I don't know why it hit me so hard, maybe because it was true. Maybe because I realized Celeste didn't want my property, she wanted submission. The next morning, I made a decision: no more defense. I laid everything out, every document Ricky had snatched, every careless admission Nolan had dropped, every photo, file, and email, and I started building a case. Not just a legal one, but a personal one. I wasn't going to hide behind regulations. I was going to rip off the mask. But just before I could send it all to the county, my inbox blew up. Dozens of emails and newsletters, anonymous tips, forwarded blog posts, and one stood out. A local news blog headline accusing me of fraud, claiming I was under investigation for misusing land. There were picturesque, grainy, outdated shots from my time in overseas security work, and a few from a veterans rally deliberately miscaptioned to imply something more sinister. Celeste had escalated. This wasn't HOA politics anymore. This was a full-scale PR war about press, bloggers for hire, maybe even PIS on her payroll. My reputation wasn't just under attack, it was being rewritten. People started to treat me differently. The barista at the diner stopped smiling. The feed store ran out of a delivery I'd ordered a week earlier. Even Ricky said someone had asked if I was stockpiling weapons out on the ranch. That one cut deep. The fight had leaked past my fences. It was poisoning the town I called home. Henry told me to wait it out, let her overreach, then we'd crush her. But I'm not built for waiting. That night, I wrote a letter not to the board, not to the state town, but to every single resident of Evergreen. A real letter, printed, folded, hand-delivered to as many mailboxes as I could reach before the sun came up. It wasn't flashy, just one page. I told them the truth. About Celeste. About the lies. About the quiet war being waged right under their noses. I didn't ask for their support, I asked for their eyes. Watch her, I wrote. See what she does when she thinks no one's looking. By noon, the fire had started. Nolan quit on the spot, left his keys on her desk and drove off. Ricky said he saw 3 board members arguing outside a Panera Bread about how to contain the fallout. Even the sheriff rang me up, saying he'd gotten an unusual number of calls asking why the HOA had zoning maps that were never filed. Celeste tried to hit back with another PR blast, but it was too late. The tide had shifted. They weren't on my side yet, but they'd stepped off hers. That was all I needed. Then the envelope came, certified mail, hand-delivered by courier. Inside was a cease and desist order from Brad Colton himself, demanding I stop making public statements that could negatively impact Evergreen's economic outlook. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Brad sending paperwork meant one thing: he was bleeding, somewhere he didn't want anyone to see. I handed the letter to Hank, the dog. He turned it into a chew toy. Then I called Henry. It's time, I told him. Let's finish this. We filed a formal complaint with the state attorney general's office, attached every shred of evidence: land misrepresentation, coordinated harassment, unauthorized zoning tactics. And at the bottom, Henry added one last piece, a request for an emergency injunction against Evergreen HOA. Signed, sealed, submitted. Celeste had thrown everything she had at me, and for the first time in weeks, I wasn't scared, because I knew something she didn't. She was about to learn what happens when the land fights back. The public hearing was scheduled in a government building that smelled like burnt coffee and dead ambition, the kind of place where paperwork gathers more dust than decisions. I wore my best pair of jeans and the old Sunday jacket my father used to wear, the one with frayed elbows and a cedar scent still clinging to the lining. Henry stood beside me, briefcase in hand, 3 highlighters tucked between his fingers. No theatrics, he muttered. Just facts. I nodded, but deep down, I knew this wasn't just another zoning hearing. Something was about to change. Celeste arrived 20 minutes late, flanked by Brad Colton and 2 board members, Adana Ridgway and Marcus Price. Their faces looked like they'd been dried under a heat lamp, and their morals followed suit. Celeste wore a navy blue suit and carried a binder so thick you'd think she was preparing for a criminal trial. She didn't even look at me as she passed it, just curled her lips slightly in a smirk of contempt. I gave her a big, slow smile, not smug, just pity. The zoning board chairman, Glenn Holloway, started the meeting with a flat monotone, shuffling through agenda items like they were coupons at a gas station. Then came our case, Item 7A, Review of Development Claims and Jurisdictional Boundaries pertaining to Parcel 48 and Subparcel A broken bar 48B, with consideration of HOA governance legitimacy. Glenn read, sounding like a man calling bingo numbers in a monastery. Then he looked up. We'll begin with the property owner. That was my cue. I stepped to the podium, opened the folder, and began a no drama, just data. I started with the original deed, complete with my grandfather's signature, the county seal from 1937, and a handwritten note referencing property boundaries that clearly included the southern parcel. Next, I presented details about the auxiliary land, specifically the irrigation easement granted in 1982. It had never been merged, redrawn, or subjected to post-division HOA claims. I passed around photos, topographic maps, and the signed letter from Celeste herself that falsely declared the entire tract governida when she knew full well it wasn't. The board pored over each page slowly. Some jotted notes. Others glanced at Celeste like they'd only just realized they were sitting on a live grenade. Then Henry took the floor. He didn't raise his voice. Yeah, he didn't have to. His tone was even, calm, almost dry, but sharp enough to cut steel. He outlined the timeline, Celeste's sketchy filings, the missing county documentation, secret previews for private investors, and false statements made to both residents and developers. Then he played our ace, the audio recording of Celeste's own voice, clear and cutting, smug with confidence. Just stall him with paperwork. If we hold long enough, he'll break. They always do. You could hear the shift in the room. Someone gasped aloud. I didn't turn to look. I didn't need to. Damage delivered. Then it was Celeste's turn. Brad strutted up to the podium like he was gunning for a legal drama Emmy. He called our filings dated, our evidence misleading, and dismissed the auxiliary parcel as administrative oversight. He quoted obscure bylaws passed at home meetings that had never been filed, twisting language into knots only a lawyer could untangle. It was fast talk, slick and too slick. Glenn asked for documentation verifying Evergreen's zoning claims. Brad smiled like he had an ace up his sleeve. Unfortunately, we're still compiling that packet. That was his mistake. Henry stood again. May I submit Exhibit H? Ricky had pulled it off Nolan's laptop. It was a trove of unvoted amendments, mismatched lot numbers, financial projections listed under post-tranche acquisition. At the bottom, a spreadsheet projecting profits if the land changed hands. The board went still. Finally, Glenn cleared his throat. This document references financial benefit in anticipation of a deed transfer that, by all evidence, never occurred. That's deeply concerning. Celeste broke first. She shot to her feet, palms flat against the table. This is a smear job. He's twisting the facts, dragging this town through the mud for his own ego. Her voice cracked on ego, and the silence that followed was louder than any outburst. Glenn leaned forward. Were you aware that Parcel 48B was legally exempt from Evergreen's jurisdiction? Celeste blinked just once, but it was long enough. I interpreted the boundaries as inclusive, she said, voice suddenly much softer. Glenn nodded slowly. And did you file the zoning update with the county? Brad jumped in, flustered. We intended to, but due to clerical that's a no. Glenn cut him off flatly. The board will take a 5-minute recess before we vote. Celeste didn't look at me. She stared at the floor like it had betrayed her. Brad leaned in to whisper something, but she didn't respond. Donna and Marcus subtly angled their bodies away from her. I stood by the wall, watching the door, half expecting her to storm out. But she stayed seated. Maybe she still thought she could salvage this, or maybe she knew it was over and refused to give me the satisfaction. 5 minutes later, the board returned. Glenn spoke again, voice calm but final. Based on the evidence presented, the board unanimously rules in favor of the property owner. All development claims by Evergreen HOA are hereby rescinded. He paused. Additionally, a recommendation will be submitted for legal investigation into zoning misrepresentation and abuse of authority. That was it. No applause, no victory speech, just a clean, satisfying click of justice locking into place. As I gathered my papers, Glenn approached and extended his hand. You fought hard, Mr. Randall. Not many do. I shook his hand and said, I wasn't just fighting for me. I fought for everyone who can't afford to fight people like her. Behind me, Celeste was frozen in place. A local reporter had appeared, snapping pictures. She hissed something to Brad and stormed out, shielding her face. And just like that, her empire began to unravel. By sundown, the news had already spread. Someone posted about it on the neighborhood bulletin board. Ricky told me 3 other homeowners had submitted inquiries into their own property statuses. Just before dusk, the sheriff showed up and not for business, just to tip his hat. Heard you held your own, he said. He didn't stay long, but before he left, he added, word is she's being called in for an ethics review by the state board. I just nodded and walked toward the barn, leaning against the fence. I looked out across the land in my land. The breeze moved through the grass like it always had, like nothing had changed, like it had just been waiting for me to come back. And in that moment, I wasn't angry, I wasn't proud, I wasn't even relieved. I was still. For the first time in weeks, Celeste had tried to drown me in noise, but she'd forgotten something vital. Silence can be a weapon, too. A week passed, and the ranch finally felt like it was mine again, and not just on paper, but in spirit. Birds returned to the eaves. The barn cats started showing up for scraps again. Even Hank seemed more relaxed. sleeping under the old oak tree like none of it had happened. Ricky came back full-time. We spent 2 solid days fixing the gate Celeste's scoons had busted and repainting the old sign at the entrance. Randall Ranch, a family-owned since 1937. I considered adding a second line underneath. No ho trespassing. I considered adding a skull and crossbones under the new signet just for flair. Celeste, on the other hand, disappeared. Not literally, though I wouldn't have been surprised if she caught a one-way flight to Scottsdale. 2 days after the hearing, she officially resigned from the Evergreen HOA due to personal reasons. No press release, no farewell post, no thank you message, just a quiet, one-paragraph surrender. Her inner circle scattered like startled rats. Donna Ridgway was spotted at the community pool, sheepishly trying to join the same water aerobics class she once tried to shut down. Marcus Price took up part-time work delivering Amazon packages, an honest gig, at least. Brad Culloton. Word was he withdrew from 3 other active HOA lawsuits after the state attorney general's office started requesting his firm's billing records. I didn't throw a party. No champagne, no victory lap. Instead, I went to the feed store, picked up a flat of sunflower seeds, and drove out to the southern edge of the property, the auxiliary parcel that had saved it all. I planted each seed along the canal, one at a time, not for show, not even to harvest, just as a reminder that something good could still grow out of a near war. As I dusted my hands and stood, the breeze picked up. It carried the early scent of summer sun-warmed wood, fresh hay, and maybe, just maybe, the last trace of Celeste's dignity blowing across the county line. But the story wasn't quite finished. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, just a wax seal, like someone binge-watched too many legal dramas. Inside was a formal invitation to speak at a regional HOA accountability symposium. Apparently, my case had set a precedent and was now being reviewed by a task force aimed at reforming zoning enforcement standards. At the bottom, in elegant serif font, it read, "Mr. Randall, we believe your experience could help ensure this never happens again." I snorted. I hadn't been looking to become the poster boy for anti-HOA resistance, but some part of me knew this was bigger than just me now. Henry agreed. "You didn't just win," he said that night, sipping bourbon on my porch. "You made her Lucia, and you did it with the whole town watching." He stared out across the pasture. "That's a different kind of justice, the kind people remember." I didn't answer at first. I just watched the sun sink behind the hills. Then I said, "She'll come back." "Not her, exactly," I added, "but someone like her." "New name, new pitch, same poison." Henry nodded. "Then you'll be ready. Or someone else will, because they heard your story." The next morning, Ricky handed me the local paper. Right there on the front page was a grainy photo of Celeste, wearing beige in a conference hall. A placard in front of her read, "Real estate consultant." Beneath it, the headline, "Former HOA president joins community efficiency initiative." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. There she was, reborn, rebranded, and trying to pass herself off as a community expert. But this time, I wasn't angry. In fact, I almost admired the audacity. Almost. Later that week, I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't a neighbor or the mailman. It was a young woman, maybe mid-20s, clipboard in hand, a county vehicle parked halfway down the drive. "Mr. Randall?" she asked, a little nervous. "I'm with county planning. We're conducting a survey of independent landowners who resisted HOA expansion. Would you be willing to answer a few questions?" I raised an eyebrow. "Is this part of some kind of program?" She smiled. "Actually, it's connected to a new county ordinance named after your Cassie, the Randall Clause." I blinked. "You're kidding." She shook her head. "Nope. The clause requires all zoning changes within half a mile of legacy rural properties to be reviewed in person by a certified county official. No more invisible maps. No more provisional absorption." I grinned. "Well, that's poetic." But the final twist came when I least expected it. One afternoon, I spotted a drone hovering low over my pasture, not high and anonymous, but low enough to know someone nearby was flying it. I tracked its path with my eyes, waited until it dipped behind the silo, then grabbed the ATV and drove up to the ridge. There, behind a patch of cottonwoods, was a rental SUV with Arizona plates. I parked about 20 feet away, approached slowly, and knocked on the driver's side window. The man inside jumped. Sunglasses, cargo pants, the panicked look of a guy who just got caught mid-scheme. "You lost?" I asked. He didn't answer, just fired up the engine. Before he could back out, I snapped a photo of the license plate. He tore off in a cloud of dust. I sent the photo to Henry. An hour later, he called back. "Guess who rented that SUV?" he asked. "Brad Culleton. His firm's compiling a reputation rehab portfolio. They're documenting people they've lost to build a comeback narrative." I laughed. "He thinks he's writing a redemption arc." Henry chuckled. "More like ghostwriting one, but either way you're in it." I hung up, looked out at the land, and said aloud, "If they want a story, I'll give them one, just not the ending they expect." I still get letters now and then from folks across the country. People who pushed back in cul-de-sacs and gated communities. People who stood firm and said, "Not today." Most of them aren't asking for advice. They just want to know they're not crazy for wanting peace, for defending what they built. I tell them the same thing every time: the law won't always protect you, but the truth sticks around long enough to matter. And as long as I've got dirt under my boots and ink on a deed, no board, no binder, and no bleach blonde tyrant in heels is ever going to take what's mine. Not now. Not ever.